I remember the exact moment it happened, like someone had ripped a page right out of my life and scribbled in their own scene without warning. It was late afternoon, and the sun had started its long descent, painting everything in warm gold. I was in our backyard, watering the vegetable patch Sheila had insisted we plant together. The hose was sputtering in my hands, and I recall being irritated by a kink in the line when I glanced up. That's when I saw them. Sheila was standing on our back porch, with a man I had never seen before. There was nothing outright scandalous about it at first glance. They weren't wrapped in each other's arms. They weren't kissing or whispering. But they were close, too close, like the air around them was charged with something unspoken. The stranger's posture was tense, shoulders squared as if he was either getting ready to fight or flee. Sheila's hands were on her hips, her expression an unreadable mix of defiance and worry. A moment later, she stepped forward and reached out, almost touching his arm. My throat went dry. I stood there, silent, feeling the hose slip through my fingers. The rusted nozzle crashed against a stone, but neither Sheila nor this man so much as twitched. My heart hammered so hard I could feel the beat in my teeth. I'd never caught my wife with anyone else in a compromising position before, never even had a reason to suspect. But suddenly, everything about that scene felt wrong. I wanted to say something, make my presence known, but I was paralyzed. It was like I'd stepped on a landmine and any movement would set off an explosion. What if this was just a harmless conversation? A friend or a colleague, maybe? But my gut told me otherwise. There was an intensity between them I'd never witnessed with anyone but me, and even then, I had to admit, it had been a while since we'd felt that spark. Slowly, I backed away, every nerve in my body buzzing like a live wire. Retreating into the house, I tried to collect myself. The light inside was softer, almost comforting, but my mind was racing. 1,000 questions clamored in my head. Who was he? Why hadn't Sheila mentioned him? Was I jumping to conclusions? I stayed by the window, just out of sight, feeling like a spy in my own home. Eventually, I saw them part ways. No hug, no kiss. He walked around the side of the house, disappearing behind our rickety fence. Sheila lingered on the porch, arms crossed, face turned toward the sky. She looked worried, but also oddly determined, as though she'd made some sort of decision in those few minutes. I should have confronted her right then, demanded answers, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. I needed more than a vague suspicion. So I did something I never imagined I would. I waited until she was distracted, then I went down the porch steps to see if he'd left any trace of himself, any clue about who he was or what they were discussing. Adrenaline made my hands shake as I scanned the path. Grass was flattened near our flower beds, footprints lightly etched in the dirt. Nothing else, not a single note or dropped business card. The worst part. My thoughts spiraled into darker territory. Maybe this was more than a conversation. Maybe this had been going on for longer than I realized. The possibility seized my heart in a vice grip. As evening shadows stretched across our yard, I forced myself back inside. I told myself to stay calm, to think logically. But logic didn't stand a chance against the gnawing fear that my life had just changed forever. When Sheila finally came in, she looked surprised to see me, as if she hadn't expected me to be there. I tried to mask my confusion with a casual question, something about dinner, but she brushed off the conversation, saying she wasn't hungry. Then she went upstairs. Alone in the living room, I stood for a good 5 minutes, counting my own heartbeats. I felt ridiculous, like a stranger in my own skin, certain that the truth was lurking just outside my grasp. And then, an hour later, I got my first real sign that my instincts were right. A single text appeared on my phone, from an unknown number, reading, "We need to talk. Urgent." I had no idea who it was or what they wanted, but a chill went through me so fast I nearly dropped the phone. This was bigger than I'd imagined. I had a sinking feeling that I was about to learn things I couldn't unlearn, and the thought of it made my stomach turn. What I didn't realize was that this was only the beginning. In fact, Everything that had happened so far would seem small compared to what I was about to discover. I stared at that text, just 6 words on my phone screen, but they felt like they carried the weight of a lifetime. We need to talk. Urgent. My pulse pounded like a drum, and adrenaline surged through my veins. Who was this? What did they know? Questions screamed through my mind, but I couldn't stand there forever, paralyzed by fear and curiosity. If I was really going to figure out what was happening, I had to push forward. I went upstairs, heart hammering, needing to talk to Sheila. But the house was eerily silent, each step echoing too loud against the hardwood floors. When I reached our bedroom, she was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her shirt. It was a simple gesture, but something about her was off. She seemed jumpy, as though she sensed me hovering behind her. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Her eyes flicked up in the mirror. "Yeah," she replied, voice tight, "just tired." She turned away from me quickly, walking over to the closet. Usually, Sheila was more talkative. She'd at least comment on my day or mention an errand, but now it felt like she was forcing the conversation to an end before it could even begin. I swallowed hard, torn between wanting to confront her outright and not wanting to sound like a paranoid fool. But then I saw it, a light-colored stain on the side of her skirt, small but unmistakable, right near the hem. It looked like a dried splash of something. Paint? Maybe an accidental spill from cooking? Except Sheila hadn't been painting or cooking, and the color and placement felt wrong. The moment I noticed it, I felt an uneasy chill ripple through my chest. My mind took off down a dark path again. Was it a sweat mark from someone else's touch? Had she tried to clean it up in a hurry? I must have stared too long, because Sheila noticed my gaze. She flipped the skirt slightly, as if to hide the spot. Her cheeks went a shade darker, and that guilt I'd feared was suddenly plain on her face. Before I could speak, she ducked into the bathroom, shutting the door a little too firmly behind her. For a few seconds, I stood there in a swirl of confusion and anger. Why was I afraid to just ask the obvious? Because I wasn't ready for the answer. Because hearing her say it out loud, "Yes, I'm seeing someone else," would tear my world apart. I tried to steady myself by checking my phone again, but there was no second message. That single text from an unknown sender remained on the screen, demanding my attention. I considered calling the number, but something told me to wait. I wanted more proof, something that would force this confrontation into the open. But how much evidence did I really need? Before I could figure it out, Sheila emerged from the bathroom, holding a different skirt in her hands. She was about to change when she caught me looking again. She seemed on edge, her eyes flickering with nervous energy. And that's when I noticed something else that hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't wearing underwear. At least, not the pair she'd been wearing earlier in the day. She always had a slight outline, but now there was nothing. Not a line, not a band. It was as if she'd deliberately discarded them. My stomach dropped. I felt my jaw tighten. Every fiber of my being screamed that this wasn't normal, that something was horribly, undeniably off. Sheila cleared her throat, her face revealing a flash of panic, and then she pulled the fresh skirt on quickly. I wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, but my voice caught in my throat. She mumbled something about needing to lie down, then brushed past me toward the hallway. For a split second, our eyes met, and I saw something in her gaze that made my blood run cold. Guilt. She disappeared before I could process everything. I slumped onto the edge of our bed, staring at the half-open closet, the bathroom door, the mirror reflecting my own shocked face. Anger, confusion, heartbreak, they all boiled inside me, tangling into a knot that made it hard to breathe. I glanced at my phone again, half expecting a second text to appear. But still nothing. The house felt like it was closing in on me, each silent room a reminder that my marriage was balanced on the brink of disaster. I thought about confronting Sheila right then and there, demanding the truth, but my gut told me I needed more. More than just a suspicious stain and a missing piece of underwear, more than a cryptic text from someone I didn't know. I wanted something irrefutable. Over the next hour, I paced around, wrestling with my own thoughts. My imagination ran wild with scenarios. She was meeting him at a motel, or in his car, or maybe here in our own home when I was gone. Every possibility felt worse than the last. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to truly doubt someone you love. Finally, I decided to call the unknown number. Maybe that was the push I needed. I scrolled to the message, hovered over the digits, and tapped the phone icon. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring hammered my nerves. Then, just as I thought it would go to voicemail, the call connected. A breathy silence on the other end. No greeting, no immediate words. I said hello, but the voice on the other side didn't respond right away. I was about to speak again, to demand who it was, when the person whispered, "You deserve to know the truth. Meet me tomorrow night, alone." Before I could ask where or why, the call ended with a hollow beep. My heart thudded in my chest, a chaotic rhythm of dread and anticipation. This was it. The moment that would either confirm my worst fears or give me a chance to salvage my marriage. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, still shell-shocked by everything. Sheila was somewhere in the house, likely wondering why I hadn't come after her. Or maybe she was hoping I wouldn't. I closed my eyes, mind reeling with possibilities, my world spinning on the edge of a secret I wasn't ready to confront. And that's when I realized, tomorrow night, everything might change. My marriage, my future, the life I thought I knew. By this time tomorrow, it could all be destroyed. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd learn a truth that would set me free in a way I never imagined. I grabbed my keys and phone, a storm of thoughts raging in my head. I needed air. I needed a plan. But most of all, I needed the truth. And I had a feeling I was about to get it. I never realized how quickly a familiar space could become foreign. How, in just a matter of days, your home could feel like a battlefield and your marriage a minefield. The night after I got that cryptic phone call, I felt the walls close in around me. We were both in the kitchen, Sheila at the sink, me leaning against the counter. Yet it felt like we were miles apart. My phone lay heavy in my pocket, a silent reminder that someone out there claimed they had answers, and I was just waiting for time to pass until our supposed meeting. But the tension between me and Sheila was suffocating, a balloon on the verge of bursting. I couldn't wait any longer. My heart pounded with an almost deafening rhythm, and the words tore from my throat before I could stop them. "Who was that man, Sheila?" I demanded, voice shaky but firm. Sheila froze. Her hands, soaked in dishwater, clamped onto the edge of the sink. She turned just enough for me to see her face, a pale mask of shock and fear. For a moment, she tried to blink the panic away, but her eyes remained wide. She looked like someone who had been caught in a storm without an umbrella, desperately searching for shelter. "Wall, listen," she trailed off, as if searching for an explanation or maybe a lie that wouldn't sound ridiculous. But no words came. She simply stood there, shoulders trembling, water dripping from her hands onto the floor. My temper flared, spurred on by the memory of that suspicious stain on her skirt and the undeniable knowledge that she wasn't wearing underwear that day. Every detail I'd tried to dismiss as paranoia roared back with brutal clarity. "How long, Sheila?" I choked out. My voice was louder this time, echoing through the kitchen. "How long have you been lying to me?" She withdrew her hands from the sink and turned fully to face me. I could see her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. Still, she said nothing. Her silence was worse than if she'd screamed or cursed at me. It was an admission of what, exactly, I was about to find out. "He's not just some random man, is he?" I continued, stepping closer. I could feel my pulse in my temples, a hammering beat that made it hard to see straight. The anger, the heartbreak, they coiled inside me, fueling words I never thought I'd say to the woman I once adored. "I saw how you were with him. The way you looked at him." Sheila's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her gaze flicked around the room like she was searching for an escape, a door out of this conversation. There was none. The truth was here, cornering us both. Say something, I hissed, fists clenching at my sides. You owe me an explanation. A reason. Anything. Her voice finally broke through the tension, hoarse and trembling. Wall, I'm so sorry. I can't. But she faltered again, eyes darting away from mine. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and as much as I'd prepared myself to see her remorse, it still cut me deep. Part of me wanted to wrap her in my arms, to comfort the woman I loved. But the betrayal burned hotter. Were you with him? I forced out. I mean, physically? She bowed her head, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I felt something inside me fracture. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was disbelief that this was the same woman I'd held in my arms, the same woman I'd shared every dream with. My mind flashed to the afternoons we'd spent joking about silly things, the quiet evenings watching movies, her laughter echoing in the living room. All of that felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by a reality I couldn't ignore. Why? I demanded, voice cracking. Did I do something? Did I not give you enough? Or is it just him? Sheila pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Tears stained her cheeks now, one after another. Well, I never meant for this to happen, she whispered. She paused, eyes filling with fresh grief as she looked at the floor. I don't know how to explain it. I'm sorry. Her words stabbed at my heart. I'm sorry. That was all she had? After everything, that was the only explanation I was going to get? The fury in me rose, but so did an overwhelming sense of sadness. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Sheila." You can't stand there and cry and expect that to erase what you've done. I stopped myself, voice choking up. I've given you everything, I wanted to shout, but the words got stuck in my throat. She stepped toward me, as if she wanted to hold me, to beg for forgiveness. My body tensed, and I backed away, ignoring the pain in her eyes. Don't, I managed, trembling with emotion. Don't touch me. Sheila collapsed into a chair at the dining table, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs shook her shoulders, and for a second I almost caved. But I couldn't let her tears distract me from the searing betrayal that had turned our life upside down. I raked my hands through my hair, pacing back and forth across the tile. I don't even know who you are anymore, I hissed, my voice echoing off the cold kitchen surfaces. Everything we built, was it a lie? Were you faking it all along? She looked up, desperation etched across every feature. Wall, I never faked us. I swear. She swallowed hard, tears carving lines down her cheeks. I did love you. The past tense did rang in my head like an alarm. Did not do. Another stab of pain speared through me. Seconds ticked by in agonizing silence, broken only by Sheila's ragged breathing. I studied the woman in front of me, so familiar, yet suddenly a stranger. The realization that she'd chosen to be with someone else crashed over me like a wave, leaving a bitter taste of betrayal. She tried once more to speak, but no words came. Finally, I forced myself to stop pacing, to stand still, to let the gravity of this moment settle on my shoulders. We couldn't go on pretending this was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. She had cheated, and the damage was done. Taking a shaky breath, I looked her straight in the eyes. I want you gone, I said, my voice firm but quivering beneath the surface. Pack your things tonight. Leave in the morning. Sheila stared at me, blinking back tears. I could see the mix of regret and fear in her face, but not a shred of argument. Not a single, please, let's talk this out. She knew there was nothing left to say. For a moment, neither of us moved. The kitchen light flickered, and I became painfully aware of the dull hum of the refrigerator, a mundane sound that seemed absurdly out of place in the midst of our life falling apart. Finally, she stood, her legs unsteady. She opened her mouth as though to protest, but shut it again, defeated, and nodded. A tear fell onto the table, shining in the overhead light. She brushed it away with the back of her hand and left the room without looking at me. When she was gone, the silence was crushing. 1,000 memories, good and bad, collided in my mind, and my chest felt impossibly tight. I braced my hands on the kitchen counter, staring at the empty doorway. Tomorrow she'd be gone, and I had no idea what that meant for me, for us, for the future we'd once promised each other. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, one thing became clear. I wasn't going to let her stay here, not after what she'd done. Whatever happened next, whether it was facing the unknown caller or picking up the pieces of my shattered life, I was going to do it on my own terms. And so the stage was set. By morning, my wife would be gone, and I'd be left with the remains of a life I no longer recognized. Something inside me said this was just the beginning of a far more twisted story. But for now, all I could do was stand in the quiet wreckage of what used to be our home, wondering if it would ever feel like mine again. I woke up to the stillness of a house that felt hollow and unfamiliar. Sheila's suitcase was gone. Her shoes by the door, gone. And in the middle of the emptiness, the worst part wasn't the sight of a closet half ransacked or the neat, heartbreaking space where her jewelry box used to sit. The worst part was the absence of her voice, that subtle hum of her presence I'd grown accustomed to for so many years. Now it was just me, staring at a cold gray morning through the bedroom window, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or if I'd made the only choice left. I forced myself out of bed, ignoring the dull ache behind my eyes from a night of fitful sleep. As I wandered into the kitchen, I could still smell the faint trace of coffee in the air, as if some remnant of our routine had decided to linger and taunt me. But the pot was empty. Sheila must have taken a final cup before leaving. My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to hate her, to focus on the anger so it could shield me from the heartbreak gnawing at my ribs. But I found no comfort in rage. All I felt was a swirl of regret, betrayal, and loneliness. I'd told her to leave, and she listened. No arguments, no pleas. That was the reality I now had to face. I thought about calling someone, a friend, maybe, but my pride wouldn't let me reach out. How would I even begin that conversation? My wife cheated on me and walked out? Instead, I sank into a chair at the kitchen table. The refrigerator's low hum filled the silence, reminding me of the confrontation that had played out here just a few hours ago. Every corner of this space seemed haunted by what we'd lost. For a long time, I just sat there, replaying our relationship like a broken film reel. The day we first moved in, practically dancing through these rooms with excitement. The time we argued about the paint color for the living room and then ended up laughing so hard we forgot why we were fighting. And the quiet mornings we'd spend reading the paper, comfortable enough in our silence to know that everything was okay. Now, all those moments felt tainted, overshadowed by the knowledge that she'd been with someone else. Anger flared up again, competing with the sadness that threatened to swallow me whole. Why wasn't I enough? Had I been distant? Selfish? Did I push her into another man's arms without even realizing it? My thoughts spiraled into self-doubt, a vicious loop that played behind my eyes. But no matter how many angles I tried to examine it from, I couldn't change the truth. She'd made a choice, and there was no going back. Eventually, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I needed to do something, anything, to distract myself from the echo of my own thoughts. I decided to tidy up the living room, a pointless task but one that might let me burn off the restless energy coursing through my veins. I picked up blankets, fluffed pillows, tried to wipe invisible dust off the coffee table. Each small action felt like it took forever, my mind drifting back to Sheila with every passing second. Halfway through, my phone buzzed, the vibration rattling against the wood. My stomach clenched. Could it be the unknown number again? The one that had triggered this avalanche of revelations? I fished the phone out of my pocket, heart pounding, but it was just a reminder notification for an online grocery order. I exhaled, disappointed and strangely relieved. I wasn't ready for more confessions or cryptic messages. Not yet. Without Sheila's presence, the house seemed bigger, almost intimidating. I could hear every creak in the floorboards, every slight pop in the pipes. Each noise reminded me how alone I was now. My mind flashed to the confrontation, her tear-streaked face, the way her shoulders shook when she realized there was no defense left to offer. I'd seen real desperation in her eyes. Part of me wanted to chase after her, to demand a better explanation, maybe to find a way to salvage the pieces. But the image of that suspicious stain on her skirt and the missing underwear gnawed at me. It was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal, pure and simple. Yet regret lingered like a stubborn shadow. I slammed my hand on the back of the couch, frustration mounting. Had I overreacted? No. She lied. She cheated. I had every right to send her away. But why does it feel like I'm punishing myself more than her? My mind had no answers, only raw emotion that refused to settle. As the morning dragged on, I found myself wandering through each room. Everywhere I looked, memories clung to the walls. The small scuff near the doorway where we bumped the furniture on moving day, the corner of the window ledge where we'd carved our initials in a fit of romantic spontaneity. It all felt like a relic of a life that had vanished overnight. I stopped in the bedroom, eyes locked on the empty dresser drawers. A surge of sadness overwhelmed me, my vision blurring with tears I didn't want to shed. Get it together, Wall. But it was too late. Pain pressed against my chest, and for a moment, I let myself feel it. It was like the house itself was mourning, its quiet rooms echoing my heartbreak. Eventually, I sank to the bed, burying my face in my hands. I wasn't sure how long I stayed like that, lost in the swirl of memories. My anger simmered, but something else started to break through, a glimmer of perspective. We'd been in a rough patch for months, ignoring issues that probably needed talking about. Neither of us had made an effort to rekindle the spark we once had. And sure, that didn't excuse what she did, but maybe I'd turned a blind eye to the distance creeping in, hoping things would fix themselves. A wave of guilt hit me, the notion that maybe my silence, my complacency, had paved the way for her betrayal. Stop, I told myself. She still chose to cheat. That's on her. But I couldn't dismiss the nagging thought that relationships rarely fall apart in a single moment. They crumble slowly, crack by crack, until one day the whole structure collapses. My phone's buzz startled me again. This time, it was a text from a friend, Dave, asking if everything was all right because he hadn't heard from me in a while. I stared at the message, uncertain how to respond. Telling him the truth would make it real in a way that frightened me. But lying felt even worse. So I set the phone aside, ignoring the message for now. I'd talk to him when I was ready, and I wasn't sure if that moment would come anytime soon. By afternoon, the house's silence had become oppressive. I threw on a jacket and stepped outside to clear my head. The moment I opened the door, a gust of cold air hit me, as if nature itself was reminding me of what had happened. I walked without direction, down our suburban street, passing the manicured lawns and neat driveways. Life went on around me, neighbors raking leaves, kids playing on bikes. To them, it was just another day. To me, it was the first day of a new reality I hadn't chosen. As I meandered toward the small park at the end of the block, I tried to picture my future. Would I sell the house? Could I stand living here with all these memories swirling around every corner? The question caught in my throat. Maybe, eventually, but not yet. Everything was too raw, the wound too fresh. It felt like I was limping forward, trying not to stare at the gash on my soul. At the park, I sat on a worn-out bench, my breath fogging in the chilly air. My thoughts drifted to Sheila again. Where was she now? Probably at some hotel or crashing on a friend's couch. Could she be with him, that stranger I'd seen on our porch? The idea sent a stab of jealousy and anger through my chest. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to hurl insults into the wind. But as I sat there, a strange sort of clarity seeped in. This pain won't last forever, I thought, a quiet realization among the turmoil. Yes, I was angry, yes, I was heartbroken, and yes, I had every right to be. But a small voice in the back of my mind insisted that, eventually, the pieces of my life would reassemble, even if they never fit quite the same way again. By the time I made it home, the afternoon light was fading. I locked the front door behind me, noticing how the house felt oddly subdued, like it was holding its breath. Nothing had changed, yet somehow everything had. The soft hush in the hallway, the echo of my footsteps across the floor, these were the same sounds I'd heard 1,000 times before. Now they made my heart ache. I dragged myself to the living room couch and switched on a lamp, fighting off the early evening gloom. Tomorrow, I reminded myself, I was supposed to meet that unknown caller, someone who claimed they had the truth. The thought made my stomach twist. What more could there be to discover? Sheila was gone. The marriage was effectively over. Did I really want to dig further into her betrayal? Part of me said no, to cut my losses and move on. But another part, the one still reeling from unanswered questions, was desperate for closure. I needed to know exactly how deep this lie ran, even if it meant tearing open a wound that was still bleeding. A pang of anxiety settled in my gut. I realized that no matter what I learned next, it wouldn't magically heal the scars Sheila's affair had left. Those scars would remain long after the full truth came to light. Even if I found some twisted sense of justice or explanation, it wouldn't erase the pain. It wouldn't bring back the sense of security I once had. I closed my eyes, breath shuddering. Memories of our happier times flashed by. Lazy Sundays on the couch, spontaneous road trips just for the fun of it, the simple comfort of her hand in mine. My chest tightened with longing, a reminder that I couldn't simply shut off love like a switch. Even now, a part of me missed her, hated her, and wished we could rewind time all at once. When I finally opened my eyes, the house was dark except for the solitary lamp. Outside, night was closing in, and with it, an unsettling silence that pressed in on my thoughts. I stared at the blank TV screen, realizing that no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the ache was there to stay, for now at least. I knew this was just the start of a long, messy process of figuring out who I was without Sheila. The betrayal hurt, but losing her, losing us, carved an even deeper wound. Nothing about this was going to be easy. No quick fix. No comforting lie that could soothe me to sleep. All I could do was face it day by day, step by shaky step. And so I sat in the lonely glow of that lamp, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost, while the flicker of tomorrow's meeting loomed at the back of my mind. I was angry, I was sad, I was riddled with questions and regrets. But beneath all that churned a sliver of determination, an understanding that I would get through this, somehow. Yet the dread lingered, tightening around my ribs. There were emotional fractures that ran deeper than I cared to admit, and I suspected they would remain long after tomorrow's revelations came to light. Sleep felt like it would never come. Even if it did, I knew the nightmares would be waiting. Because heartbreak doesn't politely leave you alone at night. It curls up at the foot of your bed, reminding you that some scars refuse to fade in the dark. And as I stared into the shadows of my once-beloved home, I felt the slow pull of uncertainty and fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I wanted morning to come, because I knew when the sun rose again, I'd still be here, carrying the same ache, haunted by the same questions, needing answers I might regret searching for. I couldn't shake the image of my phone's screen blaring my lawyer's contact details. 2 days after Sheila left, I found myself standing in the same hallway where we used to bump shoulders playfully, phone in hand, about to make the call that would end our marriage for good. The ring tone felt unnaturally loud in the hush of the house, but each pulse galvanized me. I was ready. The moment the call connected, my heart pounded in my ears. I explained everything, how I'd caught Sheila, how she'd walked out with barely a fight, how I still had questions, but none that would heal what she'd broken. By the time I hung up, my fingers trembled with adrenaline. There was no going back now. Divorce was in motion, and while it felt terrifying, it also felt necessary. It was as if a switch flipped inside me. The sense of helplessness that had weighed me down began to dissipate. I realized that dwelling on her betrayal only kept me trapped in the past. So I took my first real steps forward. I called up some friends I'd barely seen in months, invited them over for a casual night of pizza and old stories. At first, it felt awkward, like I was forcing laughter, forcing conversation, but slowly, real warmth seeped in. Memories of simpler times surfaced, and for a few precious hours, I was just Wall again, not the shell of a man reeling from heartbreak. A few days later, I rummaged through a dusty chest in the attic and found my old sketchbook. I hadn't drawn in years. Sheila never had much interest in my art, and I'd let that part of me slip away. Now, though, I set up a table near the window, pinned fresh sheets of paper, and started sketching. My lines were hesitant at first, but soon I felt that familiar rush, like every pencil stroke was a reclaiming of who I used to be before life got so tangled. Every morning, I committed to doing something, anything, that reminded me I was alive and capable. One day, I rearranged the living room furniture. Another day, I gave the walls a fresh coat of paint, choosing bold colors I never would have dared suggest when Sheila was here. The change felt liberating, an external reflection of the internal shift I was experiencing. Friends dropped by more often, too. Dave insisted we go hiking in the nearby woods. The crisp air and the crunch of leaves underfoot reminded me that the world out there was vast and beautiful, regardless of my personal turmoil. By the time we reached the summit, I was breathless but strangely exhilarated. I looked out over the rolling hills and realized that there was life beyond my failed marriage, an entire horizon of possibilities I'd barely glimpsed. Gradually, the house felt less like a mausoleum of lost dreams and more like a place where I could reinvent myself. I started discarding old items that no longer held meaning, photographs with forced smiles, souvenirs that felt bittersweet. I kept a few cherished memories locked away, not because I was clinging to the past, but because they reminded me of who I'd been before everything went wrong. Of course, some days were harder than others. I'd wake up certain that I heard Sheila in the kitchen, or I'd pass by her favorite cafe and feel a pang of sadness. And some nights, I'd stare at my phone, almost expecting another cryptic text or a desperate call from her. But those moments of longing grew fewer and farther between. I was learning to sit with the pain without letting it consume me. Then came the afternoon when I received confirmation. The divorce papers were drawn up. Seeing my name and Sheila's side by side in black and white felt like a punch to the gut. Yet it was also a call to reality. There was no more pretending, no more waiting for a miraculous fix. This was the next chapter, whether I felt ready or not. I signed the documents with a steady hand. Tears stung my eyes, but they weren't tears of regret anymore. They were an acknowledgement of all the history we'd shared and a quiet acceptance that it was over. In that moment, a surprising peace washed over me. I found myself thinking, yes, this hurts, but I'm still here. I survived. As the day wound down, I returned to my sketchbook and let the pencil glide over the paper, capturing a rough silhouette of the yard I'd neglected for so long. The lines started to bloom into something new and unexpected, a reflection of the growth I was determined to pursue. I set down the pencil and glanced around the living room, taking in the fresh paint, the rearranged furniture, and the subtle sense of warmth I'd managed to cultivate. A corner of my mouth lifted in a small, hopeful smile. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was my space, ready to be filled with my own energy and ideas. And for the first time since I'd discovered Sheila's betrayal, I felt a surge of confidence. The truth was, the affair had shattered me in ways I never thought possible. But it also cracked open a door to a new life, one where I could rediscover the things that made me who I am. Letting go of what we had was devastating, but it gave me the courage to claim a future on my own terms. I closed the sketchbook and stared at the painting supplies, the new decor, the phone blinking with messages from supportive friends. The divorce wasn't the end of me. It was the end of one chapter, yes, but also the beginning of another. A beginning where I could learn, grow, and step into a life that might ultimately be better than anything I dared to imagine. With that realization, I felt the heaviness lift just a little bit more. I still had a long road ahead, legal appointments, emotional aftershocks, lonely nights, but I also had hope. And sometimes, Hope is enough to spark the bravery we need to start over.